The SPFL Trust is an independent registered charity. We work with the charitable arms and community departments of SPFL and now SWPL clubs around the country. And our mission really is to support and enable that network to become places where people can thrive, with a particular focus on reducing the impact of poverty. And we do that with a particular look at health and wellbeing around attainment, inclusion and education. The main source of funding for the SPFL Trust, as any other charity, is grant funding. So we have to work very hard, like any other charity, to apply for funds, be it organisations like the Big Lottery or Comic Relief, all the ones you might be familiar with. But we also have to think more broadly. So we have a small handful of donors who provide a little bit of money for us to do very specific things. And we also receive some funds from Scottish Government, particularly for project work rather than core costs. And we get some money from the League every year, which helps to cover some of the core costs of the business. What that means for us as a charity is more of the money we bring in and generate through fundraising activity can be spent on the direct output of the project work and impacting on communities. Some of the challenges that we face, particularly around funding applications, is actually a double-edged sword for us. So it's brilliant that we're the SPFL Trust because that means people want to work with us. That means people in communities across Scotland want to do the projects because it's exciting and it's football. There is a big misconception that there is a lot of money in Scottish football, and actually Scottish football should pay for all of these things itself. And students who may be exploring the finance within the game, it becomes quickly apparent that that's very much not the case. It's hindered as well by the fact that we're so close and just over the border from the English Premier League, which has millions and billions of pounds at its disposal. So that can sometimes be a challenge. I think the other challenge is around people trusting that the funds they do give us will be spent on the things that we say it's going to. And so we work really, really hard to ensure that we're transparent, that we evidence everything, that the outcomes are clear, because sometimes people assume that any money you put into the game will be spent on new floodlights or the next striker or building a new stadium, and that simply isn't the case. So in the early stages, around 10 or 15 years ago, there was only around 9 SPFL or then SFL clubs and SPL clubs who had a charity. And largely that was because they were engaged in community football activity. And to be frank, community football is something that people pay for, and it provided a relegation-proof source of income, which is much sought after within football because it's so variable, your budgets over the course of a season. But actually what happened as a result of that was it became evident that there was a further role to play and that football clubs were really good at engaging with their communities. And so we started to see the establishment of more charitable trusts. And what that did was separate those activities from the clubs, which, let's face it, if a club is having particular struggles on the pitch or off the pitch with finances, it stands to reason that some of the first things that might be cut would be things that don't relate directly to first team activity, such as community programmes. So from that, we now have 42 charities in and around the professional game, and a lot of their work focuses partly on balls and bibs and markers, but actually it's around mental health, it's around weight management, it's around employability, education, attainment, self-esteem, so many different things, and actually they're really, really good at it. And so what happens then is that grows and grows, and they become a well-known, respected entity in their own right, which naturally is very closely linked to the clubs, but they are two separate organisations who interact and intertwine on a daily basis. There's clearly financial and reputational benefits to be involved in community activity. I think the financial benefits are minimal. I think some clubs have facilities they need to run throughout the week, and community trusts and charities have to have rent and rate and access to room hire and pitches somewhere. So actually there is well having a smaller, lesser cost to pay towards that, which then may go into the pot of the football club. However, over recent years, that's become a tiny part of the motivation, and actually we see that the general goodwill and the value of that goodwill in communities created by charitable trusts is extended to the football clubs, and that actually is something that serves football clubs particularly well. It also allows grounds for wider conversation in terms of commercial engagement and activity, where a commercial sponsor or a potential sponsor may be interested in being involved with a football club but has a really strong ethical commitment to CSR, and actually the community trust can be the vehicle to deliver on that for the football club. So you can start to see how actually working in genuine partnership can have a really strong benefit both to communities but also, be helpful to the football clubs who still have organisations in their heart of their communities that people are generationally, emotionally invested in, and actually it would be a huge loss for these communities if their football club was to kind of die a death. And so there's something quite powerful about the way that community and professional football works together. Community trusts, and by virtue of their football clubs, predominantly look at what the actual need is in their community first and foremost. There's a danger when you first set out to do community work that you follow funds, and so you'll see that there's a funding grant and you'll go, great, we'll design a project and we'll run that, and the football club can be involved here and we'll do this and we'll do that. And that's fine to a small extent, but actually our most successful community trusts, and pretty much all of them now, are really well tuned with their communities. And so actually they're led by what the needs are in their communities, and then they will look at whether they're best placed to be able to respond to some or part or all of those, and they will then build a programme in partnership with their communities, and in some senses their club as well, to be able to respond to that need. I think the other flip side of that is sometimes you may have a commercial partner who has a particular area of focus, or perhaps a donor who has a particular area of focus, and so that might lead some of the thinking about the types of responses and programmes that they run. But actually, even with that in mind, the community still need those services, otherwise there's no point in doing it. So the main thing ultimately is that connection with community and really understanding what they need at any given time, and how the clubs and the trusts and the foundations may be able to respond to that. The SPFL Trust really highly values being able to demonstrate the impact of our work. So we measure that in a number of different ways, particularly looking at outcomes for particular programmes. So that may be helping to support people from benefits into work. That may be reducing their involvement with the NHS because we've been able to reverse type 2 diabetes. And all of these things have a cost benefit to government, to the NHS and to society. Oftentimes that's harder to calculate on an individual basis, and so we will often look to some of the national statistics and tie our work in around that. We also take anecdotal evidence on it. One of the challenges is a lot of the work we do is around trying to prevent an increase in certain behaviours, whether that's around healthy diet and nutrition, and then trying to encourage people to perhaps drink less fizzy drinks or to drink less sugary foods. So one of our biggest challenges is demonstrating things that don't happen, because them not happening is actually the successful outcome that you're looking for, and what the value of that is to society. So there's lots of different ways we can do it. Social return on investment models are particularly used. They're complex, and so not all of our community trusts run that, but UEFA do a whole bunch of work around social return on investment, and I've done that with a number of clubs in Scotland. So what that actually allows us to do is kind of gauge an average and making a slight assumption around what that looks like on a national level. But the community trust don't just deliver our work. So we have a leverage through our grant process to be able to measure the impact and the social value of our work. But actually that's probably only about a third of the work that goes on around the country. So there's a huge national picture, and it's one we're really keen to dig a bit further into. We have a really strong relationship with Scottish Government. I'd say that's stronger in areas who would naturally link to football and sport as part of their portfolios. So health, for example, in part education. Where we find challenges and kind of that understanding tends to be for some of those portfolio areas that may not necessarily think of football as a route to help in that. And so I think there's probably not as much recognition as there could be. However, actually, it's really important that organisations like the government or local authorities or the health boards are aware of the work that we do. But the most important thing is that people in communities are aware of the work that their club trusts are doing, because actually that's where the help happens. And they're pretty well recognised in their local communities for the work that they do. And actually it doesn't matter to Joe Bloggs, who's coming on a FIT programme, that the money comes from us comes from government via us. We do a lot of work around promotion and lobbying, although I use that term loosely, because actually we're not lobbying for particular policy change. what we've been working for quite hard over the last few years is around positioning, and to ensure that when people are looking at some of the challenges that face communities now in Scotland, that they proactively think to have a chat with football to see what scope there is to be able to deliver. Because what we actually know is when it's the right programmes at the right time for the right people, football's actually very, very good at it. And so there's a real opportunity, not necessarily for recognition's sake, but actually to see past some of the challenges that football brings, because let's be honest, it brings some challenges to communities also, but actually the benefits are far greater than that at times. And so rather than recognition, I think it's perhaps about that positioning piece, but we're cracking on with that work, and so far it seems to be working. A lot of the work that's done at local level is really well supported by the local connections and the sort of sense of place that football clubs have in their communities. Actually doesn't matter the football club, but going into a football stadium, if you've never done it before, it's actually quite exciting and it's a cool place to be. And so our clubs, trusts use their own local networks to be able to share their work via local media, via social media, via annual reports, via project reports, sometimes through their players and managers, just highlighting the work that they're doing and the impact of it. That stands true also at national level, where we do a sort of national equivalent of an annual report, and we work probably more with national media, broadcasters and print publications to be able to share that story. But we have to fight hard for the column inches, as do some of our trusts locally, because sometimes the media tends to focus on some of the negative things in the game, and so to get the attention on some of the positive stuff is actually a lot harder to do than perhaps it ought to be. I think it's really important from a community trust perspective to remember that they're a charity first and foremost, and I firmly believe that if they consider themselves a charity that happens to use football to do things, that they probably won't go far wrong, and over time will build their business, their reputation, the impact of their work, because they'll continue to be led by community and by need. And sometimes that is counterintuitive to football clubs, because football clubs think season to season, league position to league position, transfer window to transfer window. And so sometimes having faith in the longer term process is just one that's not as familiar within boardrooms at football clubs. So sometimes there can be a bit of friction on that. But what we have seen is where football clubs and their boards fully understand the reason why the work happens at community trusts and have faith in that process and their staff and the team, and actually really get involved. You know, players get involved, managers get involved. They help make it easier more rather than difficult. Is the medium to longer term, it actually is a winning formulation for everybody. You know, the football club benefits, the foundation benefits, but ultimately the communities benefit. And actually those people in the communities are the fans, and they're not just fans. There are far more people that engage, and oftentimes they don't have to be a fan of the football club to go on a programme. But I think if you have faith in the process and find a way to rub along side by side, taking two very different approaches to things, there's some fantastic examples of both clubs and trusts for whom that has worked really, really well. But it's also a little bit easier said than done from time to time.